It is May, and Fulham could still be playing European football next season. So if you're like me and wondering whether to keep your passport in the drawer or get ready for some bonkers Cypriot away days, then keep on watching. Before we even talk about Fulham, we need to work out one very important thing. How many European places are actually available this season? Because just like last year, it's not as simple as saying 7th and you'll finish in Europe. Now, the Premier League has already earned a 5th Champions League spot from its coefficient place, meaning one extra spot has been freed up to play European football next season. This means that thus far, 6th has been allocated to Europa League and 7th has been allocated to Conference League. Still with me? This is where it gets busy. Now, as we know, the winners of the FA Cup also get allocated a Europa League spot. Now, if these winners finish inside of the top 7, then that spot gets freed up for 8th place. However, if the winners of the FA Cup, i.e. Chelsea, finish outside of the top 7, then that takes away that European spot from 8th place. So what this means is, more than we already would have been, we need to be setting up for a generational hate watch for Chelsea's FA Cup match. That is, if we haven't already bottled it to Bournemouth and Wolves. Without getting too carried away, it is also entirely plausible that 6 teams will get Champions League this season. Now, for that to happen, Aston Villa would need to overcome Forest's first leg defeat and win the Europa League and finish 5th in the league. And then the top 6 places will all qualify for the Champions League. But I think for now, perhaps we should just focus on 8th. So to put all this simply, Fulham probably need the European spots to drop down the table, and for that we need help from elsewhere. But with 3 games left, Fulham are still in with a chance. So that leaves the question, who are Fulham exactly competing with for that 8th position? Now, although I always think it's best to ignore all the noise around you and ignore the teams around you and focus on your own results, Fulham do need results to go their way from elsewhere. Now, starting with the 2 sides that Opta have as the most likely to finish 6th and 7th. Bournemouth and Brighton. Opta give both these teams a 30% chance of achieving Europa League football next season. So, for the sake of the video, let's say those teams get those 6th and 7th spots. This leaves the desired 8th position. We could sit here and go through every team competing for that position's fixtures and try and figure out who could beat who, but in reality, no one knows and can predict how any Premier League game will go. So instead, let's look at what Opta predict you'll actually need to finish in that 8th position this season. Now, according to Opta, Brentford are the team most likely to finish in 8th this season, and they have them finishing with 54 points. So let's set that as the benchmark that Fulham need to beat to clinch that 8th place position. Now, for Brentford to reach 54 points, all they need to do is win one of their final 3 games, and they've got Liverpool, Crystal Palace and Manchester City. Realistically, you're looking at that Palace game as their best chance, and then just hoping they lose the other 2. Now, for Fulham to eclipse this and finish the season on 55 points, achieving us 8th place and a holiday to Kazakhstan,
King in the castle, king in the castle.
We're going to need to win 7 points from our remaining 9. Difficult? Sure. Impossible? Certainly not. 2 home games against beatable sides and an away game against the worst team in the league. On paper, those are probably the sort of games that Fulham want in this scenario. We've proved that we are more than capable of winning games at home this season, with only 4 teams having won more. Now, personally, I do think that if Fulham lose any of our last 3 games, then we are out of any sort of European contention. But even a draw against Bournemouth on Saturday keeps us alive. Now, you may be thinking, well, that accounts for most teams, but what about Chelsea? Well, Chelsea would need 6 points out of their remaining 9 to hit that 54-point mark, and this means winning 2 of their last 3 games. Now, Chelsea are the worst form side in the division, and with trips to difficult places like Anfield and the Stadium of Light still to come, that's not impossible. So again, it comes back to one thing. Fulham need to do their job and hope results go their way. Now, there's what we need to do figured out. Now let's take a look at how we can do it. First, let's briefly, and I mean very briefly, touch upon the mess of the Arsenal game last weekend. Although it was a game I think we all went into expecting nothing, it almost seemed like we got less than nothing. Fulham looked abject and were completely outplayed by Arsenal. And look, I understand that Arsenal are potentially the best side in the country and they're Champions League semi-finalists, but there was pretty much 0 real fight shown from the Fulham side. I think upon seeing the lineup, I knew the game would be lost in midfield, but I was only half right, I suppose, because the game was lost not just in midfield, but all over the pitch. I could probably go through our team individually and criticise every single player from that game. But just like the players are going to, hopefully, I'm going to try and put it behind us and treat it as a sort of fugazi. Now, next up is Bournemouth, which is actually the game that I think will be the most difficult. Aside from being 6th in the league, Bournemouth also find themselves on a staggering 15-game league unbeaten run, last losing to Arsenal on January 3rd. I do think, regardless of this though, this is a game that we should be going into with the sole intention of taking 3 points. So let's take a look at how I would line up. Obviously, I'd start with Leno in net and Bassi and Anderson sitting in front of him. I think that Bassi and Anderson showed enough in those back-to-back clean sheets against Brentford and Villa to prove that they are our best centre-back partnership. With Sessegnon out, I think it will have to be Robinson starting on the left. And look, I think it is important that we speak about Robinson's drop-off in form this season. I think that he's been, honestly, a complete shell of the player we saw last season. And look, that might be understandably so. He was suffering with a long-term injury, but I think questions may have to be asked come the summertime. Is it worth cashing in for a player that still probably fetches a generous transfer sum? I do actually think Sessegnon is our better option at left-back, but due to his injury against Aston Villa, I guess Anthony Robinson's just going to have to prove me wrong this game. Now, I think right-back poses an interesting situation, because although Kenny Tete was back on the bench against Arsenal, he didn't actually come on for any of the game. I also did think that Castagna was actually one of our best players against Aston Villa, not just defensively. I thought he locked down those Villa left-sided players, but I actually think going forward, he contributed a lot as well. You know, he had that goal that was ruled out. He put that beautiful ball in that led to the goal. So I might be inclined to actually start Castagna against Bournemouth. Now, moving on to the midfield, presuming Sander is fit following missing the Arsenal game through illness, I'd quite like to see him and Lukic link up again in that midfield pivot. I think Sasha has been one of our better players in recent weeks, posing an attacking threat as well as a defensive threat. I've been particularly intrigued in the way his position has adapted since he's come back into the starting 11, often making runs beyond the striker. I think with Iwobi's absence, we've lost not just a fantastic ball carrier, but also his knack of making overlapping runs on the right-hand side, which allows Wilson to cut in and attack centrally, which pretty much gives us an overload and an extra player in the attack. Now, although Lukic's runs appear to be more central, what that actually does is it allows Harry Wilson to stay out on that right-hand side. And when he receives the ball, he now has an option whether he wants to cut in or continue and take on his man down that right-hand side. Now, moving on to the attack, where Fulham have struggled lately, scoring only 1 in our last 4. Centrally, I'd like to see King start over Smith Rowe. I think Smith Rowe was one of our worst players against Arsenal. He looked pretty disinterested. Whatever he sort of tried to do didn't work. I think in a game like Bournemouth, and especially where we're lacking any sort of attacking threat lately, I want players in the attack who I think can provide moments and provide creative sparks. And although neither Smith Rowe nor Josh King score as many goals or get as many assists as I would like either of them to get, I think that I see Josh King as being the more likely of the two to provide a creative moment. Now, where I think we've been particularly poor in recent weeks is wide positions. I think we can all probably agree that Wilson hasn't looked the same player in recent weeks, whether that's because he's already checked out ahead of a potential summer transfer move or just, a bad vein of form. I suppose we'll see in the summer. I thought Chukwueze also looked very poor against Arsenal, and I still haven't been as impressed with Bob as I thought I would be by this stage of the season. Now, I understand people want to leave Wilson out if he's leaving at the end of the season. I completely get that. But I just don't think we have the facilities at the moment to do so. We talk about needing a creative spark or a moment of magic, and Harry Wilson has proved time and time again this season that he is able to do so. On the left, I'd probably start Chukwueze again. I just don't see Bob as a left-sided player, and I think he's far more potent and dangerous from the right-hand side, and I'd probably much rather prefer to see him come off the bench on that right-hand side for perhaps a tired Harry Wilson. I think I'd even be more inclined to perhaps see Smith Rowe start on the left-hand side, but for now, I'm going to lock in Chukwueze just because, once again, I think he does have the capabilities to provide spark moments of magic, which leaves us finally with the striker. Now, those of you that have heard me speak on podcasts and such will probably know that I am a huge Rodrigo Muniz fan. I think Rodrigo Muniz has all the qualities of a top striker. However, You know, there is a however. However, I don't think he's done enough since he's come back to warrant taking that starting place back off Raul Jimenez. I was really impressed with Raul's performance against Villa and was actually quite disappointed that he got brought off at around the hour mark. I thought he threw himself around really well. He constantly seems to cause issues for defenders, and I think that his penalty prowess at a time like this in the season, where, you know, every moment and every penalty will be high pressure, it's only a positive to have him on the pitch. Now, I'd like to see a fluidity in our attack this weekend where our attacking players feel comfortable drifting off of one another. I'd like to see King help out in the wide areas, allowing our wide players to come in centrally. I'd like to see Lukic making those penetrative runs. I think what Jimenez does particularly well is he sort of drags centre-backs forward to win balls, and that can allow space in behind for Lukic to make those runs, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see that on the weekend. Now, is this a winning formula? I'm not sure. But for me personally, I think it's what gives us the best chance of success. I think we really need to bring the game to Bournemouth on the weekend, and therefore the game, or the season, I suppose, for me, all lies in that final third of the pitch. Now, I was going to end this video by saying, you know, all of that said, I actually still don't think we're going to get Europe this season. But all of that said, I've sort of motivated myself a little bit here. I think it would be incredibly Fulhamish to beat Bournemouth on the weekend and then go ahead and lose to an already relegated Wolves side the week after. But we shall see. Now, if you've made it this far and you did like the video, please do like and subscribe. I've been on a little sort of 5-6 month hiatus of South America. So that's why the channel sort of started and then stopped straight away. But if people do enjoy the content, I am happy to make more of it, especially with summer coming up, World Cup. You know, I do a little bit of transfer content, club content. So leave a comment if there's anything in particular that you'd like me to do. But yeah, you whites.